Hi. Chris Mark here from a sniper's perspective. It's February 13th, 2024. This is actually my third time recording this podcast. The first two times I got a new microphone and forgot to plug it in. Actually, it was plugged in, but it was on mute. So here we go again. Again, you can always read all of my ramblings and my diatribes on globalriskinfo.com. Right above my head, globalriskinfo.com. I write and have written on everything from politics to current events to sometimes just rants. I've reviewed rifles. I've reviewed motorcycles. And so again, globalriskinfo.com if you ever want to read my rantings. So because we're into the politics season, we've got the primaries going on and the caucuses going on. I'm going to talk again about politics, and I think it's important. One of the things that is near and dear to my heart, and I've heard this numerous times over the years, is I've had people that will say very definitively, hey, the United States is not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, or we are a presidential republic. And, I've politely corrected people on that and gotten some nasty feedback. In 2016, before the presidential election, I had somebody come out with a big, long blog post and write about how we're not a democracy. And I politely said, we are actually a democracy. And he was not polite to me, to say the least. And I'll read what he said. He said, this gentleman sent me a nasty email, and this is part of it. He said, most folks like me would call your ideas verbal masturbation. Boy, they sound good from the outside, but are really kind of stupid. And he said, kinda. So, yeah, take that for what it's worth. But he was steadfast in his belief that the United States is not a democracy. So I'm going to spend a few minutes, probably more than a few, because I like to talk, and discuss whether or not we are a democracy. So here's a quick example from my own life. And I've got a little bit of a tickle today. So I've got my, obviously, Marine Corps sniper tankard in front of me. But, I've got a dog, a Belgian Malinois service dog. And the example I give is I say my Belgian Malinois is a dog, but not all dogs are Belgian Malinois. So the United States absolutely is a form of democratization, much like the UK's parliamentary system, much like Israel's system. We're a form. There are numerous different types of forms of government, and even within democratization. So with that being said, so what is a democracy? Well, going back to one of our favorite sources of information, Wikipedia. And actually, if you go to Wikipedia and you look at the references and where they get their information, a lot of it is very good academic references, but it's just very convenient to sometimes do a search on Wikipedia. So Wikipedia states that a democracy is, and this is in quotes, a form of government in which all eligible citizens have an equal say in the decisions that affect their lives. Democracy allows eligible citizens to participate equally, either directly or through elected representatives, in the proposal, development, and creation of laws. It encompasses social, economic, and cultural conditions that enable the free and equal practice of political self-determination. So there are a couple of interesting items that we can tease out of that definition. It's consistent with all other definitions of democracy, I would believe. First, they talk about eligible citizens, and that's important because democracies are supposed to be governments by the people and for the people, and the people are citizens. Not trying to denigrate anybody that's not a citizen of the United States, but it's patently unfair for me to go to England and participate in their legal system. I don't pay taxes. I have no skin in the game. I'm not a citizen. If I want to participate, I should become a citizen, in which case I can participate. So that's important. So eligible citizens to participate equally. One person, one vote. Going back to when the former slaves, black people were allowed to vote. First it was only men, and they were only given 2/3 of a vote compared to white men. Even before that, only landowners were allowed to have a say in the government. So whether you're black, white, green, gay, purple, elderly, not elderly, if you meet the criteria, you're an eligible citizen. You have a say. Doesn't mean you're always going to get your way, but you have a say. Now, directly or through elected representatives. This part's kind of interesting as well. So think about voting for prom king and queen in high school. Okay, that's a direct democracy. You vote for Chris Mark. I never won prom king. or queen, but typically the high school quarterback and the cheerleader is going to win that, right? The popular kid. And it sounds like a ridiculous example, but there's relevance behind that. You participate equally either directly or through elected representatives. So in our form of government, the United States, we elect representatives. We have the House of Representatives, so we elect those folks. We have the Senate, we elect those folks. And then we've got the executive branch, we've got the president, and we elect him. And of course, on the state and local level, we elect governors and state representatives and so on and so forth. But the idea there is we elect representatives who represent our interests and the interest of the other constituents. So what is the benefit of a representative form of democracy? Well, the intent there was really to try to prevent or at least mitigate what's called tyranny of the majority. So going back to my example of the prom king and queen, you have however many kids. I went to high school with, about 1,500 kids. It wasn't a huge school, but, 1,500. So everybody's vote would count. So if Dave, the star football player, got, 600 votes and the next person got, however many, less than that, then Dave would win and the majority would always rule. But the challenge with that is you have what's called tyranny of the majority, where people that are not representative have their rights trampled upon, because the majority can always say, hey, majority rules, we're simply going to vote on this, and damn the torpedoes and to hell with your thoughts. So the idea is to mitigate tyranny of the majority. Does it always work? Of course it doesn't always work. Are people always happy? Of course they're not always happy. But it does have some benefits, and I'll give you one. So a lot of people, I'm surprised to learn, don't really understand how presidential elections work. And they think, well, I go vote for Hillary Clinton, President Bush, President Biden, whomever, and my vote goes directly towards that person. Well, it really doesn't. So in our system of government, in elections, we have what's called the Electoral College. And so when I cast a vote in Texas, for example, let's say I decide to vote for Trump or Haley or whomever, my vote is taken. But that doesn't actually go in a giant pool in the United States for Trump. It actually goes locally, and my elector has a responsibility to say, okay, more people that I represent as an elector have voted for Trump, therefore I will cast my electoral vote for Trump. And again, that's to prevent a tyranny of the majority. If we had direct democracy at all times, and it still gets this way a little bit, if we had a direct democracy, if you were a president and you could get the majority of the votes from Chicago, New York, LA, San Francisco, and Houston, you've won the presidency. And everybody else in the United States, their votes would not count because they're so densely populated. So we have a process where we try to assuage that. Another clear example of that is the House of Representatives. The number of representatives a state gets is dependent upon their population. So the larger population, the more representatives. So you have a greater say as a state, ostensibly, in Congress if you have a larger population. However, if you look at the Senate, every state, irrespective of population, has 2 senators. So Wyoming, who has a population, I think, of only about 400,000 people, has as much of a say as California, who has a population of nearly 40 million people in the Senate. Again, that's to prevent a tyranny of the majority. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it does at times. So at its core, again, there are 3 components, 3 factors defined by the polity data set that define a democracy. And that is that a democracy requires the existence of processes and institutions through which citizens can, 1, affect their government, 2, constrain the power exercised by their government, and 3, guarantee civil liberties. Now, that last one is sure to get under some people's skin because they say, well, my civil liberties are not guaranteed. Well, in a perfect world, it would work that way. As we know in the very real world, politics and elections and things can be a little bit clunky. If you elect somebody as your representative, that person has to represent or should represent all of the constituents and balance the needs of some against the others. So is it going to guarantee your civil liberties 100% the way you would like them guaranteed? No, it is not. But we do have that system. Now, compare that with the United Kingdom and England. They have a parliamentary system of government, as does Canada, and they will elect they will elect parliamentarians, ministers in the parliament, who will then, depending on who's got the majority, decide upon who the prime minister is. So in the UK, you are not voting directly for the prime minister as we vote directly for the president in the US. They're voting for ministers in a party, the Labour Party, for example. And that party, if they have the majority, will then elect from their membership a prime minister who acts in a lot of respects like the president of the United States. So two different types of representative democracies, but they are still both democracies. So you heard me mention this a minute ago. Where do we find the, what's a democracy and what's not? Well, there are a couple of different metrics and studies that come out, but a big one is called the Polity, Polity data set. And the Polity 40 data set, which came out, a number of years ago, 2018, I think, looked at nation states democratization levels, and it bases it from a -10 to a +10. So from -5 to +5, you're considered kind of an anocracy. You have kind of a mixed bag of democratic ideals and more dictatorship type of ideals and things like that. So it's not 100%. If you are from a +5 to a +10, you're certainly more democratic. I think at last count, the United States was at about a 7. The most democratic form of government was actually in Israel. Now, if you're a -5 to a -10, you're autocratic. And again, we can think of a couple of countries out there very autocratic. Certainly, North Korea is up there. China is way up there. Some countries in Africa, Venezuela certainly is way up there. So those are less democratic, certainly. And then there are the anocracies in the middle that are kind of middling. And then as you get to a +5 to a +10, they're more democratic. But the point here is, again, democracy is a spectrum. It's not an absolute. So when people say, hey, the United States is not a democracy, that's not actually accurate at all. We are a democracy. Now, the United States has something pretty darn unique. And, the more I read about the history of the founding fathers and this, I mean, just what brilliant people they were to have come up with this idea, not only of our governance, in an attempt to correct what they saw as the wrongs from being governed by a monarchy under King George, but they also saw an opportunity to create the Constitution. And this is absolutely brilliant if you think about it. These folks, 250 years ago, created a Constitution which provides for inalienable rights to us as American citizens. We all know about the Bill of Rights. There are 10 of those, right? 10 Bill of Rights. And of course, now we've got amendments to the Constitution beyond just the Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights are the founding 10 rights, inalienable rights we have. Now, what's interesting about the Constitution is it's a seemingly simple document, and we love as Americans to debate and argue over it, and we all think we're constitutional scholars and know the exact answers. But the reality is, it is so complex that we do have constitutional scholars that debate this, ad infinitum. For example, the Second Amendment, people will parse that to the nth degree and say, well, it says a well-formed militia. So that means that only militias should be allowed to have. And then they will look at it and say, well, it was written back in the 1700s. Therefore, it only applies to muskets. And so, we debate this ad infinitum and go back and forth, and it becomes so complex. Well, we actually have, another part of the government. It's not just the executive branch in Congress. We also have the judicial branch, which consists obviously of judges and things like that. But at the very, very top of that is the Supreme Court. And again, some people are often surprised to learn that the Supreme Court, they're not called judges. They're called justices. Now, the majority of folks on the Supreme Court used to be judges, and they can still probably be called judge. I think that's a title you earn for the rest of your life. But Elena Kagan, for example, was a law professor at Harvard. Very, very brilliant person, but she was not a judge. So what is the difference? Well, a justice looks at the constitutionality of an issue. It doesn't judge whether or not somebody is or is not guilty or innocent. It looks at the constitutionality of an issue. And that's what our Supreme Court does. So again, we've got a constitution. To a lot of people, they say, well, it's seemingly simple. We have inalienable rights, but how come it changes? Well, the process can get a little bit complex and confusing for people that don't understand. But think about overturning Roe v. Wade, which just happened a little over a year ago, and it was the law of the land since 1973. Well, Roe v. Wade was decided on principles of privacy, believe it or not. Well, the underlying issue happened to be that the woman in question was seeking an abortion. What it came down to was personal agency, the right to your own body, which is a privacy issue in the United States. And within the United States, we have laws that, in constitutional things that protect our privacy. So that's important. And so the way that we determine, what's constitutional, what's not in the bearing, I think there's a good example I can give you. So cod fishermen, this was just actually decided by the Supreme Court. Cod fishermen go out, and we've probably all seen that show about Alaska crab fishermen. Well, I have no doubt, but fishermen are fishermen. And so cod fishermen go out and they catch cod. And when they come back, it's required, obviously, by the USDA or whoever, FDA, that they have inspections to make sure catching fish of the right size, they're not taking more than their limit, they're healthy fish, they're humane, whatever the case is. So under the Biden administration, he has empowered the administrative groups to basically determine how that will be implemented. And so what the inspecting group, I think it was the FDA, decided was, well, if these fishermen have to come in for an inspection, we're going to charge the fishermen for the inspection. And the fishermen in turn sued and said, wait a second, we have to have it, but this is a very low margin industry. It's unfair for us to come in and have to have an inspection, then pay the government to inspect us. That should be what the tax dollars go for and what happens. So that made its way all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court decided on the side of the fishermen. So you're probably thinking, well, what's the relevance to anything? It's fishermen and cod. Well, it actually has a lot of relevance. And so in our form of government and the way we develop laws is we'll have precedent in case law. And so, while it seems like it was just applying to fishermen, it could just as easily apply to any government agency like the CIA or the ATF. It could absolutely. So by finding on behalf of these fishermen and against the federal government, they've now put in place a precedent. So the next time somebody is being compelled by a government agency to pay for something, it potentially, that could be a precedent to prevent that from happening. So that's the way our system works. And the Constitution really is a fascinating document. Certainly not simple. If you just look at the debates that we have around things like abortion and gun rights, LGBTQIA plus rights, gay rights, where do you draw that line and whose side should, take precedence over whom? Think about right now, there's a big, and I'm going to highlight this a little bit more in just a minute. There's a big debate right now about letting transgender people share locker rooms with biological people of a different biological sex, right? So in a women's locker room, should you allow a trans woman to enter that locker room? And on the trans side, they'll say, well, we have rights to just like every other person. Well, on the flip side, you've got biological women saying, well, we have a right to privacy as well and personal agency and to not feel uncomfortable and this and that. And it becomes much more complex when we get into dealing with children, people under 18. Should you allow, if I decided that tomorrow I woke up and said, hey, I believe I'm a woman, should I be allowed to go into a locker room with teen girls? In my personal opinion, I think we could all agree that's ridiculous. Unfortunately, these have to be fought out in court and to see whose rights supersede whomever's. Now, on that note, I brought up just a minute ago, tyranny of the majority. And tyranny of the majority is certainly important, but now what we're running into is what's called tyranny of the minority. And what tyranny of the minority means is you will have a group of people that are not in the majority, but they're so vocal, potentially so well-funded, so aggressive about their political activities that they have an outsized influence on the results. And you can see that in a number of areas, okay? I think if you look at the trans debate right now, the vast majority of Americans don't agree that we should be allowing grown men, biological men, to share locker rooms with kids, with girls. But again, that's actually making its way up. If you look at the whole Leah, Thompson, or Leah Thomas, sorry, Leah Thompson was an actress from the 1980s. Leah Thomas issue, the swimmer, in my mind, that's absolutely ridiculous. You've got a 6'5" man that is competing against, women. Physically, we're not even in the same playing field. Clearly, we're not in the same pool, but he's allowed to do that. Other areas where you'll see that tyranny of the minority kind of being pushed a little bit is with groups like Black Lives Matter, Antifa, certainly the climate activists. I think we're all concerned a little bit about climate. We want to make sure we're not burning our forests down and everything else. But they've taken it to such an extreme, and they've got such an oversized influence now in government. We're really seeing now the tyranny of the minority, which is very unfortunate. So going back to the federal government and how complex things can be. I mean, we fought a civil war basically over something called states' rights. And, when our country was founded, remember, we were colonies, right? There were 13 original colonies. And then we fought a, revolutionary war, one that became the United States of America. And we have since added states, on, and now, we've got 50 states. But each state has a degree of autonomy. We have what are called states' rights. And during the Civil War, one of the issues that was underpinning states' rights was slavery. Okay, much like when we look at Roe v. Wade, technically it was a privacy issue, but the underlying issue on that was abortion. So states' rights during the Civil War, what caused the Civil War, was the fact that you had southern states whose economy depended upon slavery, saying, hey, we're not going to get rid of slaves because we have nobody to farm the fields and it's going to crush our economy. And plus it was a cultural thing, whatever. You had folks in the North that said, well, we need to get rid of it. Southern states said, hey, we have the right to say no. And so they seceded. Obviously, we fought a very, very bitter, brutal war. And we are still the United States of America, thank goodness. But the idea of states' rights still exists today. And you can see it in a number of areas. Look at legalization of drugs, or decriminalization or legalization of marijuana. If you go to Colorado, perfectly legal. You try to take that marijuana into Utah, right next door, you're going to be arrested and put in jail. It is still federally illegal to possess marijuana, but in certain states, it is legal. Some states have more strict laws. Think about the gun laws that we have. I live in Texas. Obviously, I can go to a gun store right now and I can buy a gun and bring it home to my house. If I were in California, I would have to have a waiting period. So states do have the ability to interpret laws certain their way and take care of their own folks, their own citizens. And that's a great thing about our country is if you don't like living in California, move to Texas. If you don't like living in Texas, move to Massachusetts or Wyoming or wherever. One of the areas in Texas where we're seeing states' rights really rear its head is in the border dispute. Under the Biden administration, I mean, anybody that doesn't live in Texas and disputes this, I would invite you to come down, go to South Texas and see for yourself. Okay, the border is wide open. Statistics show that. We all know that. I don't know why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not down there crying crocodile tears like she was under the Trump administration. And obviously, I'm, being facetious about that because we all know why she's not doing that right now. But it's a wide open border. So Governor Abbott, under the Texas Constitution, said, hey, we have the ability to close our border off. So he put up razor wire. He put barriers in the river. And of course, the Biden administration sued him saying, this is a federal issue. You don't have a right to do it. So now there's a big lawsuit and they're debating over where do states' rights begin and end. Generally, states have the ability to interpret omnibus legislation. So if there's federal legislation on certain things, they can interpret it their own way to a certain level. And if you look at, for example, gun laws and the difference in states, certain states have the ability to be more strict, but there are limits to that. And that's what the Supreme Court gets to see. So our system is certainly not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I've been very fortunate to have traveled all over the world, lived in different countries, seen a lot. And I will tell you, it certainly is not perfect. Is it better than most? I think absolutely. People can debate whether or not nationalized healthcare is better than the system that we have now. Personally, I don't think it is. But again, that's a debate that we will continue to have. One, because we're Americans and we love to argue and fight over politics more than just about anything, except maybe sports. But hopefully this little discussion has given you a little bit of insight into democratization and whether or not the United States is a democracy. We certainly are. We're a constitutional republic, or some people call it a presidential republic, but that is a form of democratization, just like the parliamentary system is a form of democratization. North Korea, while claiming to be a democratic people's republic, is definitely not democratic. So again, you can always read my ramblings on globalriskinfo.com, globalriskinfo.com. I hope you enjoy these. We're going to start having guests on. I've just been kind of honing hopefully my online presence a little bit, getting a little more polished before I try to get people on and ask them questions. So like always, invite any questions, comments, concerns, any topic recommendations. If I can't dazzle you with my brilliance, I will baffle you with my bullshit, as we used to say in the Marine Corps. And hopefully not, but I'll do my best for research. So with that being said, I hope everybody has a fantastic couple of days. You'll be hearing from me soon. See, I just learned how to do that. Have a great day.